things are happening so quickly that the ability to process data, ingest data, manage data, and this is really what the promise of AI does, is it just allows us, I think, to iterate and test things so much more quickly than we ever could before, which means we can get to solutions faster than we ever could before. Things that used to take 2, 3, 4 years of trying, we can sometimes get out in 2, 3, 4 months, maybe even weeks. And that just gets us to solving problems faster, which I'm very excited about.
Try to fix the current system or reimagine something new. Will healthcare ever serve consumers just like me and you? The power's in our hands, but every side's gotta come together. We want the newer generations to get something better. Until we flip the script and talk about what gets prevented. Until we see the changes permanent as if we meant it. Until healthcare is finally consumer-centered. We've got a lot to rap about.
Welcome back to the leading podcast about consumer-centered health. This is more than a show. This is a mission, y'all. As builders and operators, we're here to share with you the latest consumer-centered ways that healthcare is being designed, marketed, and delivered. And as consumers yourselves, we want you to understand how these options work and why they might be right for you and your loved ones. Here's what's going down today. First up, we have the Flava of the Week about Whoop partnering with HealthEx to offer clinician access. How does this signal the move from performance wearable to health intelligence platform? And should we offer wearables a bigger seat at the table when building the consumer constellation of care? I'll talk about that. Then Lynne Nowak, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Surescripts, joins me to share her point of view on responsible AI, Surescripts' recent partnership with Arcadia, and how it all ties back to better experiences for patients and clinicians. I'm Jared Johnson. Let's get it. Flava of the Week. Whoop's most recent improvements signal a broader move from performance wearable to health intelligence platform. On May 8th, the fitness tracker company announced a suite of health and AI-driven enhancements and feature updates for Whoop memberships, including the introduction of live, on-demand video consultations with a licensed clinician. Launching in the U.S. this summer, this feature enables members to connect directly with clinicians within the Whoop app, bridging the gap between biometric data collection and expert interpretation. Unlike traditional healthcare experiences that rely on brief episodic snapshots, these consultations begin with a comprehensive understanding of the member's health, powered by months of continuous data, and when available, blood work and medical history. To further understand this experience, Whoop will now offer EHR syncing. In partnership with HealthEx, members will be able to securely access clinical history, including diagnoses, medications, and procedures directly within the app. This added layer of context further enhances the ability to deliver precise, individualized recommendations. Combined with their existing data, members gain a deeper understanding of how medications, conditions, and procedures impact recovery, strain, and overall performance. This integration eliminates the need for manual tracking or fragmented systems, replacing them with a seamless, secure experience built directly into the Whoop platform. What's the consumer lens? The dominant reaction out there is that this is the natural next step for wearables. Whoop is moving to connect continuous biometric data, clinical history, blood work, and clinical interpretation inside one experience now, which is great because historically wearables have generated lots of signals, but users still need help understanding what those signals mean in a medical context. Industry observers are reading it as a bridge between wellness data and clinical decision-making. One LinkedIn editor's pick said the interesting opportunities that Whoop's data, once it's communicated to a healthcare professional, could potentially become useful in clinical decision support contexts, depending on FDA guidance, of course. Another clinician reacted, framing it as part of a shift toward proactive, data-driven medicine built around real-time biomarkers and earlier intervention. So, early coverage shows that the market likes the direction of continuous data, plus records, plus clinical access. We can only hope that once these features are live, they'll address the trust questions of accuracy, cost, privacy, and scope of care. I understand that like other devices and offerings in this space, this won't be for everyone. But personally, I can't wait to give it a spin and see how well personalized data works with AI layers and clinical care to make proactive health more obtainable. Let's give a bigger seat at the table to wearables as they grow from performance devices to health intelligence platforms and invite them to be a bigger part of the rapidly growing consumer health constellation of care. That's another way that we'll build the healthcare of tomorrow, and that's the Flava of the Week. All right, everyone, let's get into the flow. Please join me in welcoming my guest this week. I'm here with Lynne Nowak. Lynne is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Surescripts. I'm really excited for our conversation here. Looking forward to diving in to some topics that impact a lot of different versions and aspects of consumer experiences. So, Lynne, welcome to the Healthcare Wrap.
Thanks so much for having me.
I would love to help our listeners get to know you a little bit better. What can you tell them about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, again, thank you so much for having me, Jared. I am the Chief Data and Analytics Officer here at Surescripts. I've been with the company about 2.5 years now. Formerly a practicing physician, internal medicine doc for about 15 years prior to coming over to the industry side of healthcare, where I've been for now well over 10 years, and a lot of time in health plans, PBMs, some health tech startup, and really, really honored and privileged to lead the data analytics team here at Surescripts now.
So what are some of those kind of day-to-day or, I don't know, like week-to-week aspects that you might be working on in any given time?
Yeah, so we, over the last 2 years or so, we've been really working on a lot of focus on just ramping up our data foundation and really organizing our data, modernizing our data infrastructure, things like our data governance, just how we're managing our data in the cloud now. It's a lot of the kind of unsexy things, I think, sometimes. Sorry to all the data engineers out there, but it's just really, really important foundational work just to make sure that the data that we're using to create new insights, which is the exciting part of it, is building up more and more analytics capabilities, data science capabilities to do descriptive, predictive analytics. But in order for any of those to actually be valuable, it has to be sitting on a really solid data foundation. So that was really probably the first, year and a half to 2 years of my tenure here, is just getting the house in order and kind of getting a modernized tech stack and data stack. And now we're into the fun part, which is really about building new insights with the data, building new products with the data, helping, patients get on therapy faster, helping doctors, just get through their days easier, which is, kind of back to my roots, and helping the docs that are still out in the trenches have the information they need to make good choices.
We're recording this pretty early in 2026. When you talk about data governance and some of the foundations and then the insights that sit on top of that, I don't even need to say what AI has done to change the landscape for us these days. But I would love to just say, we're sitting here at this moment in time and ask how you're seeing AI actually being used in healthcare, because I do think that's just as much of a question of where the signal is from the noise. Like, can you help us at all kind of separate the two?
Yeah, absolutely. And like everyone, we're, very excited about the opportunity that AI brings. We're definitely embracing AI and really leaning into AI here at Surescripts, but we're doing so in, I'll say, a very deliberate and mindful way, particularly considering in healthcare, we're dealing with PHI, we're dealing with patient sensitive information, highly confidential. So the security and just the permissions we have to use that data and how we use AI with our data is really, really important. So, we're seeing a lot of exciting things just out in the industry, things like ambient listening, very exciting. I think back to my practice days of being in a patient visit and having essentially a scribe right there with me. And by the time the visit's finished, you've got actually a really great start on a progress note that you just have to edit and beef up. And I, wouldn't have to take home stacks and stacks of charts like I used to back in the day. I'm definitely, they talk a lot about pajama time for the providers. And that was definitely, my kids will tell you they remember days of me sitting on the floor with a stack of paper charts and trying to get my dictations done. So, really awesome that those days are largely over for a lot of docs. So we look at it, so there's, more and more data that's being generated, that's being collected, that's being transmitted. And AI can be very powerful in helping us turn that data into something usable. But again, how we use that data and for what purpose is really, really important. So, we have a lot of focus here on what we call responsible use of data, and not just can we do things, but should we do things, and how do we use the data that we're privileged to have access to.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit more. That term, responsible AI use, I really like that. What specifically does that mean at Surescripts? I mean, an organization where the types of data and the insights that you're generating like are really important on both the provider side and the patient side.
Yeah, so I'll say, to get started, like everyone, we're still learning about these tools. These tools and capabilities are changing almost hourly, it feels like, certainly weekly. And so while we're just getting more comfortable with AI and what it can do and how well does it do it and how accurately can we rely on sort of the output of, generative AI or, agents that we can build with the different platforms. So we're starting in what I would call more safe spaces, right? So like a lot of folks in customer service and product implementations and things that are a little more on the administrative side of things, on just operational efficiency. How do we help the experience of our customers and our network partners be better? And really steering clear, for the most part, of things that directly involve patient data, patient sensitive data, PHI. Now we're exploring what will we be able to do with more clinical data, PHI data down the road. So we're not shying away from that, but I'd say it's very much kind of in a lab environment now where we're testing and learning and sort of incubating what we can do with AI down the road, and really right now focusing on a lot of administrative and operational things with more the transaction data than any kind of PHI with artificial intelligence at this point.
Well, it sounds like about the right type of ramp up in terms of being comfortable and feeling safe, and yet still kind of pushing to do more all at the same time. It's got to be quite the journey
Yeah,
to do
it's
all that.
exciting. And, the analysts and data scientists on the team, engineers on the team are all very excited. Even things like getting products developed faster, right? So AI assisted or AI augmented engineering and coding, vibe coding. We're doing a lot of, somebody can make an app overnight and, what can we use that for to just eliminate just basic tasks that we do every day. So, we're really trying to democratize access to these tools across the company as well. So it's not just one small team of, kind of scientist engineers that are testing these out, but marketing is using AI. We've got finance using AI and just kind of trying to help streamline our day-to-day work to get products built faster, more things out the door to help our patients and doctors.
I wonder if one of those tasks, I'm referring to prior auth, I will say, that's a task that the more time I've spent in healthcare, health IT, health tech, I'd say I could still benefit from better explanations of what it is and how it benefits people. And I've tried this on a couple of recent episodes where I've asked the guests to explain something that could be a kind of a complex topic and really distill it down. So I wonder if you could explain prior auth at a third grade level here. Just pretend I'm sitting here in class and I'm a third grader here. What can you tell me about prior authorization?
Sure. So that's an interesting one for me, particularly as a physician and a former PBM executive, and now at Surescripts where I kind of sit between the two. So the way I would describe prior auth is it has a lot of very valid purposes in the market, right? So at its core, prior auth is intended to make sure the right drug is being prescribed for the right patient at the right time with the right indication or diagnosis, the condition. So there are both clinical components of making sure this is an appropriate, safe drug for this particular patient and that it's indicated for the reasons that their provider is choosing that drug. So that's the clinical side of, is this the right drug for this patient? Then there's also a financial component to it, which is what most of us get hung up on, right? So it's, the doctor has made a choice, the prescriber has made a choice of this drug, and let's assume you're going to trust that that doctor's made a good choice. Then there becomes, is it on the patient's formulary? Is it the most affordable drug for that condition? Or is there maybe a less expensive option that would be just as good? And that's where the pharmacy benefit managers come in to say, okay, maybe there's more than one clinical choice for that patient. We want to use the prior authorization to make sure that the doctor is also choosing the most cost-effective choice for that patient, and that's usually where prior authorization comes in. So there's a clinical
Nice.
safety appropriateness and also a financial appropriateness component to prior auth.
I think that was pretty good. That was actually that's one of the simplest ways I've heard it, and that was actually very helpful. So when you're talking about some of the clinical aspects of things, I understand Surescripts had a recent clinician survey on prior authorization. I wonder if you could dive into that here for a moment or two in terms of like what stood out the most. My understanding is it was talking about how clinicians are experiencing prior authorization today. So yeah, were there any, I guess, key takeaways there?
Yeah. So I'd say nothing shocking, especially as someone who's been working in healthcare on the clinical side and then, the last 10 plus, 12 plus years, trying to actually improve the process of prior authorization. That, it's no shock that, over 80, 90% of doctors don't like prior authorization. And they believe that prior authorization has in one way or another either, caused delays in care or in some extreme cases, maybe even caused harm to their patients. So, as a clinician whose primary responsibility is to help patients get better and help take care of them, anything that's going to delay care or certainly anything that they perceive as causing harm to a patient is going to be a big problem, and they hate it. They just they don't. It's an administrative burden on them. It takes time away from them and their office staff of doing what they went to medical school to do, which is take care of patients and help them get well. So that burden reduction is really really important for us here at Surescripts. And how do we help streamline the process? How do we help eliminate some of those friction points that can simply help get the patient on the right medication faster and reduce those delays. So we've been doing a lot of analysis of our data, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 8, maybe even 10-day longer delay in a patient getting started on therapy if there's a prior authorization involved versus when there's no prior authorization involved. Now that being said, again, there's very legitimate reasons for why those prior auths may be there. We want to make sure it's the clinically appropriate and safest drug for the patient, and we also need to be financially, as a healthcare industry, as an ecosystem, we need to be financially responsible also. So how do we meet those goals of the clinical and the financial assessments of that drug for that patient, but do it quickly and get those evaluations done, get the data to the payer that they need to do that clinical validation, do that financial validation, and get a decision about if the drug is approved or not quickly. So that's really where our automated prior authorization work is coming in to really help streamline that process. Put all the data points together, make it available to the payer, and get a decision automatically back to the provider, in some cases in around 30 seconds or less, that this drug has been approved and you can move on. Patient can go to the pharmacy, pick up their drug, no delays. So that's really the goal, is just getting the patients access to that therapy with the appropriate checks in place, but do them quickly. And if the patient's not approved, you find that out right away also, and you can make a decision about what is the best alternative.
I like that because it focuses on a particular aspect of prior auth, and it makes that very real. Everyone can understand the value of speeding up the process. So yeah, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
And it feels what's beautiful about particularly our touchless prior authorization process is for some of those prior authorizations, I don't want to say they're simple, but the information, the data that's needed for the payer to make a determination about approval or not is fairly straightforward for us to get that data to the payer. The provider's office doesn't have to do anything. That's why we call it touchless. They don't have to fill out a form. They don't have to retrieve a chart or pull up information. We're able to extract that data directly from the patient's clinical record and make that data available to the payer, and the provider's office has no additional burden and additional work on their part. They just write the prescription and then it all just happens.
Fantastic. Yes. Okay. I kind of love that. The touchless aspect of it. Yeah. I want to ask you about this too. I understand that Surescripts recently partnered with Arcadia. And
Mhm.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that collaboration and kind of what does that make possible that you weren't able to do before?
Yeah, we're very excited about both the partnership with Arcadia as well as the product that our products, I should say, that we're working with Arcadia to bring to providers. And kind of the keynote product that we're working with them on is something called first fill abandonment. So, we know that depending on the drug class, anywhere from 25 to 30%, sometimes more, patients who get prescribed a new therapy never pick that medication up. They never get started on therapy. They never fill the script. And most adherence programs, and there are several great adherence programs out, payers, health plans, PBMs, even providers often have their adherence programs, but those adherence programs are almost exclusively anchored on claims data. And if you think about it, claims only happen when the patient picks up their script. So if they haven't picked up that first script, there is no claim. So patients are out there with new medications being prescribed for them. And if they never fill that first script, nobody even knows they abandoned that script. So what we were able to do is pull together the medication, the prescription coming from the doctor's office, and the dispensing information from our medication history that we get from the pharmacies to know if that script was filled or not. And we can put those together to identify when a patient has had a medication ordered and initiated, but never completed that fill. And we can make that information available to the doctor, to health plans, if they have case managers that are helping out with that patient, to understand which patients never actually got started. So that can help prompt an outreach to that patient to find out what's going on. Were they unable to afford the medication? Do they not have a car that they can't get to the pharmacy to get the medication? And maybe home delivery is a better option for them. So you can start to solve those barriers and understand what was that kept them from getting started on therapy and get them on track.
What a different type of patient experience that creates too. Like when there's an acknowledgement of, and at least identifying the fact that something didn't get picked up, like being able to actually, I guess, recognize that that happens.
Yeah.
That's incredibly important.
Almost a third of the time, right? So that's what's really scary is you think about all the patients that, the doctor, and when I was in practice, you write your prescription and you think and expect that the patient's going to go get that medicine filled. And if they don't, there wasn't really any way to know. And so this is really a new, a novel insight that we can bring to doctors that they couldn't see before, that they've got patients out there who never got started on therapy. And previously, the only way you would know that is when they come back 3 months later and they still have high blood pressure or their diabetes is still not controlled because you were not aware that they never actually got started on treatment.
Right, right. Well, I wonder if I imagine you're going to spend more time here in the near future with an even greater focus on this aspect of the patient experience. So, what else can you tell us about where Surescripts is focusing for the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so we're going to build on what we've been doing, right? So looking at, when you think about that first fill is kind of the first step in that journey. And then, we want to continue to kind of track and follow. And does the patient get that second fill? Do they stay on therapy? Do they remain adherent to that medication or do they drop off? Do they drop off of therapy altogether? Or do they maybe switch to a different medication for, any one of a variety of reasons? Maybe it's not effective. Maybe they're having side effects. So really, stepping back and looking at that holistic, longitudinal patient journey of what happens from the time of diagnosis, therapy decision, therapy coverage, picking up the script, staying on therapy, and really helping our network partners understand what's happening, along every step of that journey and when are patients falling off therapy or even failing to start therapy and why. Really getting into the understanding of why is it happening. And then what gets really exciting is when you start to get into the predictive analytics to anticipate what patients are likely to do and help them even before something bad happens, right? If you know somebody's at high risk for not picking up their first script or high risk for not staying on therapy, you can design interventions to be proactive and not reactive and try to prevent some of those bad things from happening before they do, which is where it gets really exciting.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And we hope we can get there quickly, like sooner than later, so we can impact even more lives.
Absolutely.
Been great to think about all of these things, and it's been super insightful to understand what's possible now. Lynn, as we wrap up here, my last question for you is, as you personally, maybe this has to do with some of the aspects, some of these developments you've been sharing, and maybe has nothing to do with that. Either way, I'm curious what gives you hope personally for the future of healthcare in our country, and kind of what you look forward to from this point.
Yeah, I'm just really excited about the speed of innovation. that we're going to be seeing in the coming, I'll say, months, right? It's not even years at this point. Things are happening so quickly that the ability to process data, ingest data, manage data, and this is really what the promise of AI does, is it just allows us, I think, to iterate and test things so much more quickly than we ever could before, which means we can get to solutions faster than we ever could before. Things that used to take 2, 3, 4 years of trying, we can sometimes get out in 2, 3, 4 months, maybe even weeks. And that just gets us to solving problems faster, which I'm very excited about.
Me as well. Lynn, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for everything you're doing to make healthcare consumer-centered and give us more opportunities to impact lives like we were mentioning. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.